Tonight, we continue our journey through the ancient world of Greek mythology. The universe has already been born. Chaos has given way to earth and sky. The Titans have risen and fallen. Zeus now rules from the heights of Mount Olympus, while humanity has received both the gift of fire and the burden of suffering. The foundations of the world have been laid. Now another age quietly begins. It is an age not ruled solely by gods, but by mortals whose courage would allow their names to echo through history for thousands of years. The Greeks called them heroes. Unlike the gods, heroes could bleed. They grew old. They knew fear. And one day every one of them would die. Perhaps that was exactly why their stories mattered so deeply. Greatness achieved despite mortality seemed far more remarkable than greatness possessed by immortal beings. To the Greeks, a hero was not always a perfect person. Many made terrible mistakes. Some were proud beyond measure. Others acted out of anger or grief. What united them was not perfection, but the extraordinary scale of their lives. They faced challenges no ordinary person could overcome, and through those struggles, they revealed something about human nature itself. The first, and perhaps greatest of them all, was a man whose strength became legendary across the ancient world. Even today, when someone accomplishes an impossible task, we still compare them to him. The Greeks knew him as Heracles. The Romans would later call him Hercules. His story begins not with triumph, but with jealousy. Long before Heracles took his first breath, Zeus fell in love with the mortal woman Alcmene. Hera, once again confronted with another reminder of her husband's unfaithfulness, directed her anger not toward Zeus, but toward the innocent child who had yet to be born. Even before Heracles entered the world, Hera attempted to prevent the prophecy that he would become one of the greatest heroes Greece had ever known. According to tradition, Zeus had declared that a descendant of Perseus born that day would become a mighty ruler. Hera delayed Heracles' birth while hastening that of another descendant, Eurystheus, ensuring that Heracles would ultimately serve him rather than rule over him. Thus, before taking his very first breath, the greatest hero of Greece had already become entangled in the rivalries of Olympus. As an infant, Heracles displayed strength, unlike anything ever witnessed among mortals. One quiet evening, while the household slept, Hera sent two enormous serpents into the nursery. Beneath the faint glow of moonlight, they silently crossed the stone floor, their scales glistening as they approached the cradle, where the child slept beside his half-brother Iphicles. The room remained still until the snakes raised themselves above the children. Iphicles awoke first and cried out in terror. Heracles reached forward without fear. Tiny hands closed around the neck of each serpent. When the family rushed into the room, they discovered the impossible. The infant, calmly holding the lifeless bodies of both snakes, while the danger had already passed. To the Greeks, this was not simply a display of extraordinary strength. It was destiny quietly revealing itself. As Heracles grew older, he became renowned not only for his immense physical power, but also for his skill with the bow, the spear, and the sword. He studied music, wrestling, and the traditions expected of noble young men. Yet beneath these accomplishments remained the constant attention of Hera, whose resentment never faded. Then came the tragedy that would define the rest of his life. The exact circumstances differ between ancient authors, but the central story remains remarkably consistent. Hera struck Heracles with a terrible madness. Deprived of reason, unable to distinguish friend from enemy, he committed the most horrifying act imaginable. When his mind finally cleared, he discovered that he had killed his own wife, Megara, and their children. The Greeks did not tell this story lightly. Unlike many modern tales where heroes are flawless, Heracles became great only after experiencing unimaginable grief. His greatest achievements were not performed to gain glory, but to seek redemption. Broken by guilt, he traveled to Delphi to ask Apollo's oracle how he might atone for what he had done. The oracle instructed him to place himself in the service of King Eurystheus. There he would perform a series of seemingly impossible tasks. Only then could he hope to purify himself and find peace. These challenges would later become known as the 12 labors of Heracles. Although many people remember them simply as adventures, the Greeks viewed them as something deeper. Each labor forced Heracles to confront not only monsters, but aspects of himself. Patience instead of anger, endurance instead of despair, wisdom instead of relying solely upon strength. His first labor led him to the hills of Nemea, where an enormous lion terrorized the countryside. No ordinary beast, the Nemean lion possessed a hide that no spear, sword, or arrow could pierce. Hunters had tried for years to kill it. None had returned. Heracles tracked the creature through rocky valleys until he discovered its cave hidden among the hills. Realizing that weapons would accomplish nothing, he blocked one entrance to the cave with massive stones and entered through the other. Inside, in darkness broken only by faint shafts of sunlight, man and beast faced one another. The lion charged, its claws struck with tremendous force, yet Heracles held his ground. Setting aside every weapon, he wrapped his powerful arms around the lion's neck and wrestled it with his bare hands. The struggle echoed through the cave, until finally the great beast fell silent. Unable to skin the animal using ordinary knives, Heracles discovered that only one of the lion's own claws could cut through its magical hide. He fashioned the skin into a cloak and wore the lion's head as a helmet for the rest of his life. It became one of the most recognizable images in all of Greek mythology. For his second labor, Heracles traveled to the marshes of Lerna. There lived the terrifying Hydra. Unlike ordinary serpents, the Hydra possessed many heads. Ancient writers disagree on the exact number. Some described 9, others many more, but they all agreed upon one terrifying detail. Whenever one head was severed, 2 more immediately grew in its place. Its breath poisoned the air itself, while its blood carried deadly venom, unlike anything else in the ancient world. At first, Heracles attacked with his sword, cutting away head after head. Yet each victory only made the creature stronger. For perhaps the first time, strength alone failed him. His nephew Iolaus accompanied him, and together they devised another approach. Each time Heracles removed one of the Hydra's heads, Iolaus immediately sealed the wound with a burning torch, preventing new heads from growing. The final immortal head could not be destroyed, so Heracles buried it beneath an enormous rock, where it was said to remain forever. From the Hydra's poisonous blood, he dipped the tips of his arrows, creating weapons so deadly that even the slightest wound would become fatal. The Greeks often repeated this lesson throughout mythology. Intelligence and cooperation frequently succeeded where raw strength alone could not. And so, with 2 labors completed, Heracles continued onward, never knowing that the greatest challenges still awaited him. His journey had only just begun. The third labor took Heracles far from marshes and mountains to the forests of Arcadia, where the Ceryneian hind wandered beneath towering pines. Unlike the monsters he had faced before, this creature was neither vicious nor cruel. It was a magnificent deer sacred to Artemis, with golden antlers and bronze hooves that flashed in the sunlight as it ran. Eurystheus believed the task impossible. Killing the animal would anger Artemis herself, while capturing it alive seemed beyond the ability of any mortal. So Heracles did not chase the hind with reckless speed. Instead, he followed it patiently. For nearly an entire year, according to ancient tradition, he tracked the creature across mountains, valleys, and rivers, through every season, beneath the heat of summer and the cold rains of winter, never allowing it to disappear completely from his sight, yet never forcing a confrontation before the right moment. Eventually, as the hind paused to drink from a quiet stream, Heracles carefully captured it without causing serious harm. As he returned carrying the animal, Artemis herself appeared before him. Rather than responding with anger, she listened as Heracles explained that he acted not out of pride, but in obedience to the oracle, and to complete the punishment laid upon him. Satisfied by his honesty, Artemis allowed him to continue, provided the hind would later be released unharmed. The Greeks admired this labor because it demonstrated restraint rather than violence. Sometimes true strength meant knowing when not to fight. The fourth labor brought Heracles to Mount Erymanthus, where an enormous wild boar ravaged villages and destroyed crops wherever it traveled. Unlike the lion or the hydra, the boar possessed no magical powers. Its danger came from its immense size, incredible speed, and unstoppable fury. Rather than attempting to overpower it directly, Heracles pursued the beast into deep winter snow upon the mountain slopes. As the snow grew deeper, the boar's movements became slower, while Heracles, accustomed to hardship, steadily closed the distance. At last he seized the exhausted animal alive and carried it upon his shoulders all the way back to Mycenae. Ancient artists delighted in depicting Eurystheus hiding inside a giant bronze storage jar at the sight of the enormous beast, terrified that Heracles had actually succeeded once again. The fifth labor seemed almost laughably ordinary, compared with the monsters that had come before. Eurystheus ordered Heracles to clean the stables of King Augeas. Yet these were no ordinary stables. Augeas owned thousands of cattle, and the buildings had not been cleaned for decades. Generations of waste had accumulated until the task appeared impossible to complete, even in months, let alone a single day. Most people would have reached for a shovel. Heracles looked instead at the landscape itself. Nearby flowed two rivers, the Alpheus and the Peneus. Using tremendous effort, he diverted both rivers through the stables, allowing the rushing water to sweep everything clean before returning to their natural courses. The labor became another lesson treasured by the Greeks. Intelligence often accomplishes more than brute force. Sometimes the simplest solution is the one no one else considers. Yet Eurystheus refused to count this labor because Heracles had accepted payment from Augeas after completing the work. The hero would therefore have to perform another task later to replace it. The sixth labor carried him to Lake Stymphalus, whose marshes had become home to terrifying birds with bronze beaks, metallic feathers, and claws sharp enough to pierce armor. They darkened the sky whenever they took flight, attacking travelers and poisoning the surrounding countryside. The marsh itself proved almost impossible to cross. Unable to approach the birds directly, Heracles received unexpected assistance from Athena. She presented him with a bronze rattle crafted by Hephaestus. Climbing a nearby hill, Heracles shook the instrument with tremendous force. Its echo rolled across the marshland. Startled by the unfamiliar sound, thousands of birds suddenly rose into the sky. As they circled overhead, Heracles drew his bow and released arrow after arrow until the surviving flock abandoned the region forever. Again, the Greeks emphasized adaptability. Victory belonged not simply to the strongest warrior, but to the one willing to change his methods when circumstances demanded it. The seventh labor required Heracles to capture the Cretan bull. This magnificent animal had once been sent by Poseidon to King Minos of Crete. When Minos refused to sacrifice it as promised, the god caused the bull to become wild, devastating the island as it wandered across fields and villages. Heracles wrestled the enormous creature into submission before carrying it across the sea back to mainland Greece. Later traditions claimed this same bull eventually escaped and wandered into Attica, where it would later be defeated by another great hero, Theseus. In this way, Greek mythology often connected one story to another. No tale truly stood alone. The eighth labor took Heracles to Thrace, where King Diomedes owned a team of horses unlike any ever seen. These mares fed not upon grass but upon human flesh. Their chains had to be forged from iron, because ordinary rope could never contain them. Ancient poets never fully explained whether the horses had always been monstrous, or whether years of cruelty under Diomedes had transformed them into such terrifying creatures. After defeating the king, Heracles fed Diomedes himself to the mares. Their savage hunger finally ceased. Freed from the influence of their cruel master, the horses became calm enough to be led away. The story carried a subtle moral familiar throughout Greek literature. Brutality often creates further brutality. Remove its source, and even violence itself can begin to fade. By now, Heracles had traveled farther than almost any hero before him, across mountains, islands, forests, marshes, and kingdoms. Every labor demanded something different from the last, and although people remembered him chiefly for his extraordinary strength, the Greeks increasingly portrayed him as a man learning wisdom through hardship. Every victory came not because he was invincible, but because each challenge forced him to become more thoughtful than he had been before. The ninth labor led Heracles to the distant land of the Amazons. Among all the peoples described by the ancient Greeks, few captured their imagination quite like these legendary warrior women. They were said to live beyond the familiar Greek world, governing themselves without kings and becoming masters of horsemanship, archery, and warfare. Whether the Amazons represented a real culture, exaggerated through storytelling, or existed entirely within myth, remains debated even today. But to the Greeks they symbolized a society unlike any they had ever known. Eurystheus commanded Heracles to retrieve the girdle of Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons. This was no ordinary belt. It had been given to Hippolyta by Ares himself, as a symbol of her authority and leadership. Unlike many of his previous labors, this one did not begin with violence. When Heracles arrived, Hippolyta welcomed him peacefully. After hearing why he had come, she agreed to give him the girdle willingly. It seemed that, for perhaps the first time, the labor would end without bloodshed. But Hera once again intervened. Disguising herself as an Amazon warrior, she spread a rumor throughout the camp that the strangers intended to kidnap their queen. Within moments, confusion erupted. Warriors mounted their horses and surrounded Heracles and his companions. Believing Hippolyta had betrayed him, Heracles fought his way free. In many versions of the story, Hippolyta herself was killed during the battle, not through hatred, but through a tragic misunderstanding created by Hera's deception. It is one of several myths reminding us how easily distrust can transform peace into conflict. The 10th labor carried Heracles farther than he had ever traveled before. Beyond Greece, beyond familiar seas, beyond lands most people would ever see, he journeyed to the distant island of Erythea, near what the Greeks imagined to be the western edge of the world. There lived the giant Geryon. Descriptions of Geryon differed across the centuries. Some poets imagined 3 complete bodies joined together: Others described one body with 3 heads and 3 torsos. Regardless of the exact form, he possessed extraordinary strength and guarded a magnificent herd of red cattle. Even reaching the island proved difficult. The journey led Heracles beneath the burning sun across the deserts of Libya. Ancient writers tell us that the heat became so unbearable that Heracles, exhausted and frustrated, raised his bow toward the sky itself and threatened Helios, the sun god. Rather than punishing such boldness, Helios admired the hero's courage and offered him a remarkable gift, a great golden cup. Each evening, Helios used this vessel to sail across Oceanus after the sun had set, returning quietly to the east before dawn. Now Heracles borrowed the cup to complete his voyage toward the edge of the world. The image is strangely peaceful, endless golden water stretching toward the horizon, while the hero drifted silently beneath the evening sky in the vessel of the sun itself. Upon arriving, Heracles first encountered Orthrus, the 2-headed hound that guarded Geryon's cattle. After defeating the monstrous dog and its shepherd Eurytion, he finally confronted Geryon himself. The battle was brief but fierce. One poisoned arrow, dipped long ago in the blood of the Hydra, ended the struggle. Yet returning the cattle proved almost more difficult than taking them. Hera continually interfered, sending biting insects to scatter the herd and causing rivers to flood across his path. Patiently, Heracles gathered every animal again and continued the long journey back toward Greece. By now, the labors had taken him to every corner of the mythical world: forests, islands, deserts, mountains, and oceans. With each new challenge, the Greeks expanded the boundaries of their own imagination. Heracles became not merely a hero, but an explorer, carrying listeners to places few ordinary people could ever hope to visit. The 11th labor required something even more extraordinary. Eurystheus ordered Heracles to retrieve the golden apples of the Hesperides. These apples had been presented to Hera on the day of her marriage to Zeus, and grew within a sacred garden somewhere at the far western limits of the earth. Their exact location remained unknown even among the gods. The garden was watched by the Hesperides, mysterious nymphs of the evening, and protected by the immortal serpent Ladon, whose many heads never slept. Unlike previous labors, Heracles did not know where his destination even lay. His journey became one of questions rather than battles. He sought guidance from travelers, sea gods, and ancient beings older than Olympus itself. Eventually he captured Nereus, the wise old man of the sea, a shape-shifting deity capable of becoming water, fire, wild beasts, or wind itself. Only after refusing to release him through every transformation did Nereus finally reveal the path toward the garden. There Heracles encountered Atlas, the mighty Titan condemned since the Titanomachy to hold the heavens upon his shoulders. Many modern images imagine Atlas carrying the earth, but the earliest Greek tradition describes him supporting the sky itself, preventing heaven and earth from collapsing together once more. Seeing an opportunity, Heracles proposed an exchange. Atlas would retrieve the apples himself, since the Hesperides were his daughters, while Heracles temporarily carried the weight of the heavens. Atlas agreed. For perhaps the only time in mythology, a mortal, or rather a mortal hero born of Zeus, stood beneath the entire sky. Imagine the silence of that moment, the immense dome of heaven resting upon one pair of shoulders, clouds drifting endlessly overhead, stars waiting beyond daylight, unseen but ever present. When Atlas returned carrying the golden apples, he announced that he preferred leaving Heracles beneath the sky, while he personally delivered the fruit to Eurystheus. Heracles, realizing the trap, calmly agreed, but asked Atlas to briefly take back the heavens while he adjusted the lion's skin upon his shoulders for greater comfort. Atlas accepted without suspicion. The instant the burden returned to the Titan, Heracles collected the apples, thanked him politely, and continued his journey. Even here, the Greeks celebrated cleverness alongside strength. Wit often accomplished what force alone could not. The 12th and final labor would surpass all that had come before. Eurystheus no longer sought merely to challenge Heracles. He wished to send him somewhere from which no mortal had ever returned. He ordered Heracles to descend into the underworld itself and bring back Cerberus. This was no ordinary beast. Cerberus, the great hound of Hades, stood guard at the gates of the realm of the dead. Ancient poets differed on his appearance. Some described 3 heads, others 50 or even 100. Yet the image that endured through the centuries was that of a massive black dog with 3 fearsome heads, a serpent for a tail, and snakes coiling from his body. His purpose was simple: to allow souls to enter the underworld, but never to leave. For most Greeks, death marked a journey from which there could be no return. Heracles was about to attempt what no ordinary human ever could. Before beginning, he underwent sacred initiation into the Eleusinian mysteries, ancient religious rites whose secrets were never written down. Those who participated believed they gained a deeper understanding of life, death, and what awaited beyond the grave. Even today, historians know remarkably little about these ceremonies because revealing their details was forbidden under penalty of death. Guided by Hermes and Athena, Heracles reached one of the legendary entrances to the underworld. The Greeks imagined several such places scattered throughout the world. Dark caves where sunlight faded, and the boundary between life and death grew thin. As he descended, the familiar sounds of the living world slowly disappeared. No birds sang. No wind stirred the trees. Only silence remained. The air itself seemed different, heavy and still, as though time moved more slowly beneath the earth. Soon Heracles came upon the river Styx, whose dark waters separated the world of the living from the realm of the dead. Waiting upon its shore stood Charon, the silent ferryman. For countless generations he had carried the souls of the deceased across the river in his narrow boat. Because of this belief, many Greeks buried their dead with a small coin placed upon the body, payment for the final journey. Without it, some believed a soul might wander the banks of the Styx for 100 years before finally crossing. Charon rarely accepted the living, yet the authority of the gods, combined with Heracles' extraordinary destiny, allowed the crossing to take place. The boat glided slowly across the black water. Above there was no familiar sky, only endless darkness stretching beyond sight. Upon reaching the far shore, Heracles continued deeper into the kingdom of Hades. Ancient writers described many remarkable figures dwelling there. He passed the spirits of ordinary men and women, their earthly lives now little more than distant memories. He encountered judges who weighed the deeds of every soul before deciding where eternity would be spent. Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus, once mortal kings themselves, now served as eternal arbiters of justice. Some souls wandered peacefully through the asphodel meadows, neither especially virtuous nor wicked during life. The greatest heroes entered Elysium, a place of perpetual spring where suffering no longer existed. Those guilty of terrible crimes faced punishment in Tartarus far below, where myths told of Tantalus forever reaching for fruit that withdrew from his grasp, Sisyphus endlessly pushing his great stone uphill, and Ixion bound forever to a burning wheel. To the Greeks, these stories served as reminders that actions carried consequences, extending beyond earthly life. Eventually, Heracles stood before Hades and Persephone themselves. Unlike many modern depictions, Hades was neither monstrous nor cruel. He ruled with quiet dignity over a realm that every living creature would eventually enter. Death was not his invention, merely his responsibility. Heracles explained why he had come. Hades listened carefully before answering. He would permit Cerberus to leave the underworld under one condition. The beast must be subdued without the use of weapons. Heracles accepted immediately. Soon he found Cerberus standing watch at the great gates. 3 pairs of eyes fixed upon the approaching hero. The enormous hound growled low as serpents twisted around its body. When it lunged forward, Heracles met the attack with nothing but his own strength. He wrapped his arms around the creature's necks, holding firmly despite snapping jaws and thrashing coils. Slowly, through patience and extraordinary endurance, Cerberus ceased resisting. For perhaps the first and only time since the world began, the guardian of the underworld allowed himself to be led into the land of the living. When Eurystheus saw the monstrous hound approaching Mycenae, he was overcome with terror. The king, who had assigned every impossible labor, now begged Heracles to return Cerberus immediately to Hades. The final labor was complete. Years of suffering, wandering, and impossible challenges had finally come to an end. The Greeks believed Heracles had accomplished far more than defeating monsters. He had overcome despair, guilt, exhaustion, fear, and even death itself. His greatest enemy had never truly been the lion, the Hydra, or Cerberus. It had been the darkness within his own heart after the tragedy that began his journey. Through endurance rather than perfection, he earned redemption. Heracles would continue to experience many adventures after the 12 labors. He fought giants, rescued kingdoms, and traveled with other heroes. Yet these stories belonged to later chapters of his remarkable life. Eventually, after enduring terrible suffering once more, through the poisoned robe given to him by Deianira, Heracles built his own funeral pyre upon Mount Oeta. As the flames rose around him, Zeus carried his son to Olympus itself. There, unlike any other hero before him, Heracles was welcomed among the gods as an immortal. For the Greeks, his story represented something profoundly hopeful. Although no mortal could escape hardship, suffering did not have to define the rest of one's life. Even after terrible mistakes, courage, perseverance, and the willingness to keep moving forward could lead not only to redemption, but to greatness itself. And while Heracles found his place among the immortals, another hero was quietly growing in the city of Athens. Unlike Heracles, whose strength became legendary, this new hero would become famous for something different. His greatest weapon would not be overwhelming power. It would be intelligence. His name was Theseus, and beneath the island of Crete, within a labyrinth from which almost no one escaped, his greatest challenge patiently awaited. Theseus was born in the city of Troezen to Aethra, daughter of King Pythius. His father was said to be Aegeus, king of Athens, although some traditions also claim that Poseidon shared in his divine parentage. As with many Greek heroes, the stories surrounding his birth blended the mortal and the divine, allowing different regions of Greece to emphasize whichever tradition they held most dear. Before returning to Athens, Aegeus placed his sword and a pair of sandals beneath an enormous stone. He told Aethra that when the boy became strong enough to lift the rock, she should send him to claim these tokens and seek his father. Years passed peacefully. Theseus grew into a young man admired not only for his strength, but also for his intelligence and calm judgment. When at last he lifted the great stone with ease, revealing the sword and sandals hidden beneath, His mother told him the truth of his birth. Rather than traveling safely to Athens by sea, Theseus deliberately chose the far more dangerous overland route. The roads between Troezen and Athens had become infamous. Bandits and murderers preyed upon travelers, each employing cruelty in a different form. Theseus believed that a future king should first make the roads safe for the people he hoped one day to govern. One by one he confronted these criminals, defeating each in a manner that mirrored the crimes they themselves had committed. To the Greeks, this represented justice, restoring balance rather than simple revenge. By the time Theseus finally approached Athens, stories of the mysterious young hero had already begun spreading throughout Greece. King Aegeus welcomed the stranger without immediately recognizing him. Complications arose because the sorceress Medea, who had taken refuge in Athens after her own extraordinary adventures with Jason, recognized who Theseus truly was. Fearing that the rightful heir might threaten her own position, she persuaded Aegeus that the newcomer should be poisoned before he became dangerous. At the banquet, just as Theseus reached for his food, he drew the sword his father had hidden beneath the stone years before. Aegeus immediately recognized the weapon. Realizing the truth, he struck the poisoned cup from Theseus's hand and embraced the son he had believed lost forever. Father and son were finally reunited. Peace, however, would not last. For many years Athens had lived beneath a terrible burden imposed by King Minos of Crete. The origins of this tribute lay in tragedy. Minos's son Androgeos had traveled to Athens and later died under uncertain circumstances. Some traditions claimed he was murdered through jealousy, while others suggested he fell victim to a dangerous challenge. Whatever the truth, Minos declared war. Victorious, he demanded that every 9 years Athens send 7 young men and 7 young women to Crete. There they entered the Labyrinth. None ever returned. Deep beneath the palace at Knossos lived the Minotaur, part man, part bull, entirely terrifying. Its existence began with another tale of broken promises. Years earlier, Poseidon had sent Minos a magnificent white bull, expecting it to be sacrificed in gratitude. When Minos instead kept the beautiful animal for himself, Poseidon punished him in an extraordinary way. He caused Minos's wife, Pasiphae, to fall hopelessly in love with the sacred bull. From that unnatural union came the Minotaur. Ashamed of the creature yet unable to destroy it, Minos ordered the brilliant inventor Daedalus to construct a maze unlike any ever imagined. The Labyrinth. Its passages twisted endlessly beneath the palace. Corridors doubled back upon themselves. Stairways led nowhere. Every turn resembled the last. Once inside, escape became almost impossible. The Minotaur simply waited. When the next tribute from Athens was prepared, Theseus volunteered to join it. His purpose was not merely to survive. He intended to end the nightmare forever. The ship sailed quietly across the Aegean Sea. Families watched from the shore, knowing that those aboard had never before returned. Among those who greeted the Athenians upon their arrival in Crete was Ariadne, daughter of King Minos. Ancient writers differ on exactly why she chose to help Theseus. Some say Aphrodite inspired her with love. Others suggest she recognized the justice of his cause. Whatever the reason, Ariadne secretly approached the young hero before he entered the labyrinth. She placed into his hands 2 simple gifts, a sword and a ball of thread. The sword offered a chance against the monster. The thread offered something perhaps even more valuable, a way home. Before descending into the maze, Theseus tied one end of the thread near the entrance. As he walked deeper into the twisting corridors, he slowly unwound it behind him. The further he traveled, the quieter the world became. The sounds of the palace disappeared. Only distant echoes remained. The air grew cooler. The stone walls seemed endless. Somewhere ahead, hidden within the darkness, the Minotaur waited. Eventually, Theseus reached the center of the labyrinth. There stood the creature that had haunted Greece for generations. Ancient artists portrayed the battle in many different ways, yet all agreed upon one point. Theseus faced the beast alone. The struggle echoed through the empty corridors, until finally the Minotaur fell. Silence returned to the labyrinth for the first time in countless years. Without Ariadne's thread, victory would have meant little. Patiently, Theseus followed it back through every twisting passage until daylight finally appeared once more. The young Athenians emerged alive. The curse had ended. Under cover of darkness, Theseus, Ariadne, and the rescued youths escaped Crete by ship before Minos could prevent their departure. Yet Greek mythology rarely allowed perfect endings. During the voyage, they stopped upon the island of Naxos. Exactly what happened there remains one of the oldest debates in Greek mythology. Some traditions claim Theseus abandoned Ariadne while she slept. Others insist the god Dionysus himself commanded that she remain because she was destined to become his wife. Whatever the truth, Theseus sailed away without her. The return journey carried another tragedy still. Before leaving Athens, Aegeus had asked his son to replace the ship's black sails with white ones if he survived. Lost in thought and exhausted after everything he had endured, Theseus forgot. As the ship approached Athens, Aegeus looked out across the sea. He saw only black sails. The Aegean Sea. Thus Theseus returned home victorious, yet also burdened by loss. Like Heracles before him, he discovered that even the greatest victories often carried unexpected sorrow. As king of Athens, Theseus was remembered not only for defeating monsters, but for strengthening the city itself. Later traditions credited him with uniting the scattered villages of Attica into a single political community under Athens, a process known as Synoecism. Whether this occurred exactly as the myths describe is impossible to know. Yet the story reflected how the Athenians understood the origins of their own city. They saw Theseus not merely as a warrior, but as a founder. Unlike Heracles, whose greatest victories came through extraordinary strength, Theseus represented another kind of hero. He succeeded because he planned, listened, adapted and understood when intelligence mattered more than force. Together, the two heroes embodied qualities the Greeks deeply admired: courage guided by wisdom. Yet beyond Greece itself, across distant seas where the horizon met the unknown, another adventure was already beginning, one that would gather the greatest heroes of an entire generation aboard a single ship. Its destination was Colchis, its prize was the Golden Fleece, and its leader was a young prince named Jason. Jason's story began with a stolen kingdom. His father, Aeson, had once ruled the city of Iolcus until his half-brother Peleus seized the throne. Fearing that the rightful heir might one day return, Peleus sought to eliminate every possible threat. Jason, still an infant, was secretly taken away and entrusted to the wise centaur Chiron, who had already guided many future heroes. Hidden among quiet mountain forests, Jason grew beneath Chiron's patient instruction. Unlike ordinary teachers, Chiron emphasized balance: hunting, music, medicine, philosophy, survival, leadership. He believed a true hero required wisdom just as much as strength. Years later, when Jason reached adulthood, Chiron reminded him of his birthright. It was time to reclaim what had been taken. On his journey toward Iolcus, Jason came upon an elderly woman struggling to cross a fast-moving river. Without hesitation, he lifted her upon his shoulders and carefully carried her across the current. The woman was no ordinary traveler. She was Hera, queen of the gods, disguised as an old woman to test his character. Pleased by his kindness, Hera promised her quiet support throughout the challenges that still lay ahead. In helping a stranger without expecting anything in return, Jason unknowingly earned the favor of Olympus itself. As he crossed the river, he lost one of his sandals in the rushing water. When Jason finally entered Iolcus, wearing only a single sandal, Peleus turned pale. Years earlier, an oracle had warned him to beware a man arriving with one sandal. Recognizing the prophecy unfolding before his eyes, Peleus concealed his fear behind a welcoming smile. Rather than killing Jason outright, he devised a task so dangerous that no one could reasonably survive it. "If you truly wish to claim the throne," Peleus declared, "bring me the Golden Fleece." The Golden Fleece belonged to a magnificent golden ram sent long before by the gods to rescue two royal children from sacrifice. After completing its journey, the ram had flown into the heavens, becoming the constellation Aries, while its shining fleece was placed within a sacred grove in the distant kingdom of Colchis, hanging from an ancient oak tree and guarded day and night by a sleepless dragon. Colchis lay at the very edge of the known world. To most Greeks it seemed almost mythical. Reaching it would require crossing unfamiliar seas filled with unknown dangers. Jason accepted without hesitation. To accomplish such a voyage, he gathered the greatest heroes alive. Among them came Heracles, before many of his later adventures; Orpheus, whose music could calm wild beasts; Castor and Pollux, famed horsemen and warriors; Atalanta in some versions of the tale, one of the greatest female hunters of Greek mythology; Peleus, who would later become the father of Achilles, and many others whose names echoed throughout later legends. Together they became known as the Argonauts. Their ship, the Argo, was unlike any vessel that had sailed before. Built by the master shipwright Argus under Athena's guidance, it even contained a sacred piece of oak from the oracle of Dodona within its prow. According to legend, this timber could speak, warning the crew of danger ahead. As dawn broke over the harbor, the Argo slipped quietly into the sea. Families gathered along the shoreline, watching the ship disappear beyond the horizon. No expedition quite like this had ever been attempted. The voyage quickly became a series of extraordinary encounters. The Argonauts landed upon unfamiliar islands where every shoreline seemed to conceal another story. They faced violent storms that threatened to shatter the ship against hidden rocks. They encountered the Doliones, where confusion during the night tragically caused allies to mistake one another for enemies. The Greeks often included such episodes to remind listeners that even brave people remained vulnerable to simple human mistakes. Later, the Argonauts reached the land of the blind prophet Phineus. Once favored by the gods, Phineus had been cursed for revealing too many divine secrets. Every day a table of food appeared before him. Every day the monstrous harpies swooped down, devouring or fouling everything before he could eat. Weak with hunger, Phineus begged Jason for help. The winged sons of Boreas pursued the harpies across the sky, until the monsters finally abandoned the old prophet forever. In gratitude, Phineus revealed how the Argonauts might survive one of the greatest obstacles of their journey: the clashing rocks. Known as the Symplegades, these enormous cliffs crashed together with tremendous force whenever a ship attempted to pass between them. No vessel had ever survived. Following Phineus's advice, Jason first released a dove. The bird flew between the rocks just before they slammed together, losing only a few feathers from its tail. As the cliffs slowly separated again, the Argonauts rode with every ounce of strength they possessed. The Argo shot forward through the narrow gap. The rocks crashed together once more, clipping only the stern of the ship before settling forever. From that day onward, the simple gauges remained fixed in place. The impossible passage had finally been conquered. Beyond them stretched waters no Greek heroes had ever sailed before. At last, after countless hardships, the coast of Colchis appeared upon the horizon. There, beneath towering forests and ancient mountains, waited the Golden Fleece itself. And beside it stood the woman whose choices would change Jason's fate forever. Her name was Medea. The Argonauts eventually returned to Greece, carrying the Golden Fleece after one of the greatest voyages ever imagined by the ancient world. Yet for the Greeks, the treasure itself was never the true reward. The journey had transformed everyone aboard the Argo. They had crossed unknown seas, faced monsters, survived impossible trials, and discovered that even the greatest heroes depended upon one another. Heracles possessed incredible strength, but relied upon wisdom and loyal companions. Theseus escaped the Labyrinth because Ariadne gave him the thread that guided him home. Jason would never have reached the Golden Fleece without Medea's knowledge, the courage of the Argonauts, and the kindness he had shown long before his adventure began. Perhaps this is one of the quiet lessons woven throughout Greek mythology. No one achieves greatness entirely alone. Every hero stands upon the sacrifices, guidance, and friendship of others. Looking back across these ancient stories, another pattern slowly begins to emerge. The monsters themselves are rarely the true focus. The lion, the hydra, the Minotaur, and the dragon guarding the Golden Fleece are memorable, yet they are not what made these stories endure for nearly 3,000 years. What people remembered were the choices made when fear appeared, the willingness to continue walking even when every path seemed uncertain, the courage to act despite knowing that suffering often accompanies greatness. The Greeks understood something remarkably human. Heroes were not perfect. Heracles carried unbearable guilt. Theseus returned home only to lose his father. And Jason's own life would eventually become a tragedy, despite all he had accomplished. They succeeded not because they were flawless, but because they refused to stop moving forward after failure. Perhaps that is why these myths still resonate today. They remind us that courage is not the absence of hardship, but the decision to face it anyway. As one generation of heroes slowly passed into legend, another quietly prepared to step onto the stage of history. In the city of Troy, a young prince named Paris was growing toward adulthood. Another child named Achilles was training beneath the wise centaur Chiron, unaware that he would one day become the greatest warrior Greece had ever known. Nearby, Hector was learning what it meant to protect his family, his city, and his honor. None of them yet realized that their lives would become forever intertwined in a war so immense that poets would still sing of it thousands of years later. A war fought not only with swords and spears, but with pride, love, prophecy, and fate itself. But those are stories for another night. For now, the sea grows calm once more. The Argo rests quietly within its harbor after years upon distant waters. The forests of Arcadia sway gently beneath the evening breeze. Mount Olympus stands peacefully above the clouds, while the gods watch over a sleeping world. Somewhere, beside a quiet fire beneath a sky filled with familiar constellations, an old storyteller speaks the final words of another ancient tale before allowing the silence of the night to return. May these stories remain with you as they have remained with countless generations before us. carried across seas by sailors, whispered beside campfires, shared within marble temples, and remembered beneath the same stars that still shine above us tonight. And as sleep slowly finds you, let the heroes of Greece drift gently into legend once more. For their journey has ended, but many more still await us beyond the horizon. Good night.